a lot of pinning, you know, over at Pinterest. He was the CTO at Reddit, and I just found out that he was actually the boss of one of my good friends from high school. So, small world, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marty Weiner. Thank you.
Scary to see myself that big. Hello, how's it going? I'm super excited to be here. It's been 16 years since I've been in Switzerland, and I love the architecture. We don't have things that are from 1300 in the US. We didn't have a country back then. So I love exploring the architecture out here. One thing I'm a little nervous about is whenever I'm in a new country is will my jokes translate? So we'll have to see if I'm funny over here. In Japan, it seemed to work. In China, nobody laughed. Damn it. So anyway, today I'd like to talk about building culture. And I'm always hesitant to put the word culture when I'm building, when I'm going to give a talk, because people don't want to come and listen to culture. So I kind of have to trick you. So I think my title must have changed between now and then. But I've now tricked you into listening to me about culture. I was a founding engineer at Pinterest, and I was a first CTO at Reddit, and now I'm off on sabbatical land attempting to write a book. Attempt being the key word there. I'm trying. But throughout this time, I learned a lot about building companies, and I learned that building a startup is very, very hard. And I'd like to make it less hard, which is sort of why I'm writing this book. It's about building companies from zero to IPO. And this is one portion of all of that. So what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about how companies grow, and then that'll set the context for some of the discussions I want to teach you that I've learned about culture. This is Instagram. Instagram's growth. That's the y-axis is millions of users, and on the horizontal is time. Interestingly, the Pinterest graph looked exactly the same. They were always almost exactly like 2 months ahead of us. It was a strange, bizarre thing that we were sister companies kind of growing up together. And the way companies evolve is in the beginning, you're developing an idea. This is usually when the founder is supposed to be paying attention in calculus, right? But they're drawing. And then you launch, exciting, and then nothing happens. At Pinterest, we used to, the founders said that we were in stealth mode, but not because we wanted to be. That was sad. And then something happens. People are coming. We're not really certain why, but they're coming. And then this is when you become a big successful business. That traction time is interesting. So what I'd like to describe to you now is what the emotion is throughout that phase. This, to me, is pure creation bliss. These days, with Amazon, with GCP, and all these things, I can make an app, and I can make a backend, and I can deploy it out to the universe with maybe one engineer now. It used to maybe require two. I think I could do it on one, maybe even half, while I'm watching movies. This is also bliss. You get a couple friends together, you're getting ready for launch. It's pure creation. It's so cool. This is hell. Because this is when you have launched your product and nobody gives a shit. This can be a really hard time. And look at this time frame too. Pinterest was about the same. That's 9 months. And you're sitting there wondering, should I pivot? And I guarantee someone here is going to ask me afterward, tell me about when I should pivot. And that's the billion-dollar question. I'm starting to put together a few things to hint toward it, but if I knew the answer, I'd be far richer than I am right now. This is a different hell with more hackers. Usually at this point, you have accrued a couple of employees who, they're okay, they're not great. It's about who you could get, and you're not sleeping anymore. You found success, but now you can't sleep. And normally these friends who you had so much fun with, now they're your mortal enemies. So, you hate everything, but you got to keep going. And now this is hard. This is when usually the phase of the company where you figured it out, you're getting your management working, things are starting to sort out, and it's getting better, but it's still really hard. And this is when you realize you don't know what the hell you're doing. And now the healing can begin. And this is when you get to a maturing engineering org like Pinterest and Instagram and Facebook and these other companies are. So my objective is to get you to anybody who's in this position to hear faster and through it smoother. The way I describe these phases is this is adolescence. It's pure fun. It's okay. You can do whatever you want. You can't really break things. And it's these awkward teenage years where your voice is cracking and it's just really awkward because you don't really have things figured out. It's a weird phase. This is the phase I'd like to focus on because, and I have to do this in one breath for funniness, you have found a path to success. Somebody cares. You've got traction. But Your app is breaking all the time. Your tech debt is mounting. You have no HR support staff. You need funding. You need to build product. Your lead engineer is an asshole. You have to fire the next engineer who can't code. Hiring is difficult. And you have 15 engineers and growing. And whatever systems and processes you had previously, they're not working anymore. This sucks. This was pretty much, Pinterest at a certain phase and Reddit when I joined. So there's a lot here. I can't do it all, sadly. I'd like to, but brace yourself, traction has come. Do you have Game of Thrones here? Does this translate? Whew. Okay, good. All right. I only have 30 minutes, actually less now since I just spent about 5 minutes talking about it. But so what I've done is I've got a lot of topics I would like to cover. I've whittled it down to 2 that I think are the most critical because they're not discussed enough. And they're about this concept I've sort of developed that's an aggregation of other concepts that others have developed called debts. I'm going to describe what I call 5 debts, and there's actually a few more. And those debts in any corporate structure will lead into my discussion about a deeper understanding of culture, where I'm trying to give more framework to how we discuss culture. Let's do it. So the 5 debts I'm going to talk about today are pretty much what I experienced when I joined Reddit and what we had to work on to get Reddit into fast-moving pace. This is about 2015. The company had gone through some interesting different phases, but I was basically brought in to make the company, as I jokingly call it, a boring, normal Silicon Valley company. No more excitement. Make it fast-moving. Make the excitement on the good end, not the crazy end. And it's about building a really fast-moving engineering org that just can pump out great products all the time. So I'm going to go through 5 here. There's corporate debt that we had to deal with, brand debt, technical debt, management debt, and culture debt. And there's 3 other debts that I defined when I first joined Reddit that helped me sort of break down this big problem. But I'm not going to go into them as much. There's, of course, actual debt, right? I guess I need a different symbol than dollars. But anyway, there's product debt. That's another big problem that companies take on. And there's home debt, meaning usually if you're working your butt off on these startups, your home suffers. And that's honestly what I'm doing right now. I'm on sabbatical with kids. The thing about debt in a startup is it's okay to have debt. In fact, you should have debt. Because in the beginning of a company, you shouldn't be worrying about insurance forms. You as a founder should be worrying about your product. And if you are worrying about insurance forms, you're probably doing the wrong thing. So as you build the company, you should accrue debt, and then you have to figure out the right time and place to pay it down. And that's pretty much how every company acts after they get past traction. They've accrued a lot of debt, and now it's time to fix it. So corporate debt. I think this is a good mix of engineers. The thing that a lot of engineers forget is that you're not engineering in a vacuum. You've got to have all these other support structures in a company. So this is a debt affecting the operations of the business. This is where, for instance, contracts are not being written well. For a while, you've just been kind of writing them on napkins or something. That's got to be fixed because that's not optimal. That's not legally copacetic. So that's why you hire in business development, procurement. Common HR functions tend to get neglected. That's something, especially in small startups, if you're working at HR, you're probably doing the right thing, but at some point you need to start making sure that your company is happy and healthy. Financial, you need to be tracking it, you need to be modeling it, and legal is another common one. These are some examples of what I describe as corporate debt. And these are all things that typically are accrued by the time you get to traction. And the reason why this is so core is that it is the very middle of your company. Your engineers cannot be creative and focus on the next big thing if they're worrying about, if their paycheck's going to come in because, finance doesn't have their stuff together. So this is one portion of it. It's something that we had to work on at Reddit. The way we did this, honestly, is we hired some really great executives, and we said, go make it happen, and they made it happen. Brand's another one that companies tend to accrue. This is debt affecting the perception of the company. Every company tends to have this, especially startups. One example of this kind of debt is negative or the incorrect perception. Incorrect meaning that you want everybody to believe in your company in this way, and they think of it this way. Another one is lack of awareness. In the early days of Pinterest, nobody knew what Pinterest was. I'd go to them, and they'd be like, Pinterest? And that was, that has major ramifications. Some of them are, obviously, user growth. This is why you hire a marketing team, so people know who you are. Monetization, your ads people need to be, that brand needs to be managed as well. This is something that we've been working on at Reddit and making a lot of progress. The ability to pivot a product. If everybody believes your product is X, Y, and Z, and you want to start moving it, this can be exceptionally hard. And hiring. This is one you may not think about, but if you're a CTO or VP of engineering, you better be a brand person because you cannot hire. In those early days of Pinterest, I'd go to senior engineers and they'd be like, who are you? I don't care. Now Pinterest could hire anybody they want, but we had to work on engineering brand as well as corporate brand and everything else. So it really impacts your hiring. Classic thing is you'll find with startups, when I advise them, they can't get an Android engineer. Which, by the way, if there's any Android engineers, please talk to me. I need some Android engineers. But it's really hard to get these engineers, especially if it's a small startup, because you've got to convince them in this amazing thing that your startup's going to do, and that's hard to do, especially when you've got companies like Facebook and Google offering very big amounts of money. Technical debt. I'm assuming everybody in here kind of understands technical debt, but I'd like to hone it just a little bit more on what my definition of it is, and that's debt affecting the ability for engineering to deploy sufficiently bug-free and performance systems. What I mean by that is I don't care if there's crap code over here as long as it doesn't affect my ability to push out new ideas. That's all that matters to me. As an engineering manager, my job is to make the assembly line build stuff as fast as possible and stuff that works. So examples, I'm sure this crowd knows this really well, but for instance, common one you see at startups is too many engineers committing to one source repo. This is why we have microservices as a concept, so that everybody has their own piece of the pie. Reddit, that was one of the first things I started working on. They had a monolithic code base, everything in one spot. If everybody's working on that, that's 300, if you get up to 300 engineers, that's 300 engineers touching the same code, breaking it all in unison, which is a beautiful thing. Not really. Insufficient testing methodology. This is another thing that I faced. This makes it hard for your engineers to confidently push more stuff out, and usually means that you have to pull back. So this makes everything fragile. Poor peer review. Actually, Reddit had really good stuff. This is something we had to develop at Pinterest, and this is about making sure that there's a good wisdom sharing and that your code is actually decent. Difficult deploy system, bad code, and what that can lead into is bad code leads into a lot of problems. And then there's poor performance. If you have poor performance and you got to deploy the thing, this is a common problem at companies that are scaling past their ability to keep up with the performance. And what this can affect is, again, back to the core purpose of what I believe engineering is, which is the ability to turn around product ideas, to make whatever idea they have reality quickly. And it also hampers your ability to onboard new engineers. If I want to get in some contractors and I want to bring in 10 and I want to accelerate everything and it takes them 4 weeks to get used to the code, I spent 4 weeks worth of contract work and I'm 4 weeks behind. They should be able to get in and be active in maybe a couple of days, depending on the product, obviously. Management debt. This was a term coined, I think, by Joanne Bradford and Ben Horowitz around what happens when you neglect management. There was this experiment that Silicon Valley tried. I don't know how wide-reaching it got, but there was the no management thing. Wouldn't that be an amazing utopia? Until you realize, oh wait, managers do things. They're not just jackasses who tell you not to do things. And so this kind of hit Silicon Valley, and now it's kind of a joke that this was done before. This is debt affecting effective operations of an engineering team. What you're really talking about is you've got all these people, and you want them to work well together. And you can have these great ideas that maybe if I just let them all go, it'll all work, and it ain't going to happen. So examples of this. I remember one day at Pinterest, we had a person come in and they had a couple people draw up the organization chart, and there were about 10 different opinions. And so this commonly results in, you have your operations, and then you have infrastructure, you have product teams, and you have the user. Well, you want them to all flow super smoothly all the way up so that nobody ever knows that they're depending on anybody. And so if you don't have an org structure that's targeted at your customer, you're usually leaving a lot on the table, or you're just not functioning. Another common one you see with a lot of startups or younger teams is the mission, the vision, the values, and especially the prioritization are not well defined. This is commonly because management's not doing their job. Planning and execution are not smooth. What I love in a good, smooth running universe is you've got maybe like a weekly cadence, and every week you keep pushing everything forward. Everything's organized, and it just works in such a way that your engineers don't have to care about all that crap that the managers do. They just get to code and do beautiful stuff. And if you don't have all that, usually it impacts your engineers' ability to have fun making code. And very pronounced is your communication lines usually break down. And now you have fighting between teams, you have mistrust, and I'll get into that in a little bit more. And also there's the individual engineers. Lack of management generally means that those engineers are not getting the attention they need. I don't know if you've all had this experience where you have one manager with 30 directs and you're like, it'll be fine. No, those engineers are getting no attention, and there's probably one that's making the rest miserable, and it starts to blow up from there. And these are all things that you can classify as management debt as you're trying to piece apart your company and understand where your problems are. It affects happiness and growth of your engineers. It affects trust, and it affects the ability to predictably, build something and get it out, because you need all these engineers working in cadence to get something out when you say you want to get it out. Culture. Okay, so let's talk about culture. Culture was interesting when I started to tackle it at Pinterest. I basically was told, hey, go figure out culture. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what the hell is culture? So I realized that in Silicon Valley, I don't know about out here, but there was no good way of even talking about culture. It was this buzzword. People like to talk about it, but yeah, we have a good culture. We believe in culture. Well, what is culture? So I did this experiment. I talked to a bunch of people, and I asked them the same question, what's your company name? I talked to people at LinkedIn, Amazon, Pinterest, Facebook, Reddit, just anybody I could get my hands on. I asked them, tell me about your culture. And the way they would talk about it was in these ways. We're a secretive culture. You could think of like Apple keeps their stuff really tight, right? Versus transparent. This is a little bit more like Reddit is. Just everything is open. Warm and friendly versus direct and painfully honest. That's another common one. Warm and friendly would be like what I think Facebook and Pinterest describe themselves. Direct and painfully honest is what Amazon describes themselves. And what's fascinating about all of these is that they all work for that company, which is great. I think that's one major important portion of the culture, but what's missing that people don't describe is what I think is a more common thing. What is necessary for building a company? So that I can go inside a company and say, is it good or not? So I kind of wanted to piece that together, and this is the framework I came up with. Actually, let me give you the precursor to that framework. Have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Is this sort of well known? Okay, so I don't need to, I'll describe it just briefly. This is created by Abraham Maslow in like 43 or something as a way of looking at what successful individuals, what they're made up of, what they're like. What we're talking about at the top is self-actualization, which is kind of a weird term for basically being all you can be. So if you want to be the best poet out there, you can be that. If you want to be the best doctor, best lawyer, if you want status, or if you want money, how did these people achieve it? And then there's these layers below it that lead into it. And the argument being that if you're missing these layers, it doesn't mean you can't achieve those things. It's just a hell of a lot harder. So things like esteem, belonging, and very critically is safety. This to me is about, will tomorrow be okay? So in places like where there's, in Florida right now with the hurricanes, you may not have a house. Actually, that even gets into physiological. But you need to trust that tomorrow will be okay. And in the physiological, that's where we're talking about things like food and shelter. And what I'm curious about is, how do these, if you don't have these, how does it ripple up through the rest of the system, right? Safety, by the way, this is where trauma victims tend to lie. Something will have happened in their life. The rug is now pulled out from under their feet, and they don't trust certain areas, and it ripples up in interesting ways. And that's how you can help trauma victims. So I took this, and I basically mapped it to companies where your self-actualization, this is what the company is all about, what they're going to achieve for the rest of the time. It's their mission, right? The values, that's that part I talked about where it's warm and friendly, or it's direct. Whatever those values are higher up. They're what make that company uniquely that company. And below that, I've come up with this layer that is a little bit, I didn't want to name the layer. I tried to name the layer, but then I realized it got too damn complicated. So I'll just tell you what's in it. I believe these are 4 things that are critical for every single company. I don't believe that there's any of these that you can sacrifice. And I'll go into each one of these: trust, respect, motivation, and competence. The competence piece, I'm not going to go into as much. It's basically, if you want to achieve your mission, maybe your mission is to build rockets, and you don't have rocket engineers, you're going to have a hard time. So I'm not going to go into competence, but I'll go into trust, respect, and motivation because they're a little more nebulous, right? And then below that, you also have safety. And there's a lot into safety. We'll go into that. I'm not going to go into physiological, but you can believe the physiological would have an impact. If you're in an area that's poor and people are not eating and your company can't support them, that's a problem. Or if you're in a hurricane area and people don't have shelter, it's going to ripple up the whole chain from the bottom layer, which is really difficult. I'm not going to go into so much because I haven't studied it, because in Silicon Valley we haven't had these problems, but it's a fascinating area. Safety. Let me talk about safety. This is the bottommost layer that I'm going to consider, so it is absolutely critical, and I'll talk to you how I dealt with it at Reddit and Pinterest and how other companies deal with it. Do people feel tomorrow will be okay? And there's a couple ways this can come out. Discomfort about funding is extremely common in startups where the funding might run out. So this is also, you see this a lot in the movie industry these days. They make a giant movie and then they have to promptly shut down because they just used up all their money. So how does this ripple across your org? I'll get into how you fix that. Discomfort about the company trajectory. Do people like where it's going? Do they believe in it? This can be a major problem. Discomfort about job security. There was this one startup I won't name, but they eventually died, and I think it was at least partially because if you read about the CEO and read about what people talked about, he was a jerk. He would jokingly tell people, only he said it was joking. I don't believe he actually was joking. I'm going to fire you. And that goes right to the core of people's safety. They got kids at home. They got a mortgage. You're going right. So they may laugh it off and then be actually terrified. And how is that going to ripple up? The core tenet I've thought about here is that if you don't have safety, no matter how good your values are, no matter how well stated they are, they're going to mess it up. Discomfort about physical and emotional safety. You're seeing a lot of this come out right now. I won't name the companies. You might imagine them. They've been in the news around things like sexual harassment. This goes right to the core of safety for a major portion of your population, which is really bad. Anger is another common one that we have to deal with. And this goes to, it makes people just not want to come into work. It makes them uncomfortable to be in work. That's really messed up. So how do we fix this? The top one, transparency. This is one way you can address funding issues. I've seen companies weather these storms pretty well by the CEO being absolutely transparent. We're running out of money. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's what I'd like to do. And here's where things will go. The reason this is so critical is because safety lies deep with the territory of why, the belief system. And humans are really good. If they don't know the why, they make up the why. They don't even know they're doing it. They just make up the why. And oftentimes they assume the worst. So if you tell them, you're transparent with them, it may be that it's an unsafe environment. They may lose their job because funding runs out, but at least they know all the details. And they know that you're working on it, you care about it. Yep. Painting a clear picture of goals and vision. This can really help out because a lot of times safety comes down to a now. It's a very visceral today thing, right? I'm terrified about tomorrow. If you set a vision and you talk to them about a year down the road or 2 years down the road, this is very useful for the human brain because they can say, well, today sucks, but I see where we're going. And I did this, we did this at Reddit, and I think it was one of the things that helped a lot to clear up safety issues. Being open and honest with people about careers and status. This is very critical so that they know they don't have to fill in the mental workflow about if their manager likes them, which people will assume their manager hates them very often. Firing people who undermine safety. This is something I had to deal with a couple times. Here's the deal with safety. It's two-sided, right? You've got the people making unsafe environments, and then you've got the people who feel unsafe. Even when you fire them, it's still in the walls. Like whatever was bothering them at whatever company, I've seen this in many different companies, you fire the person who's causing an unsafe environment, and people still feel it for months, even up to a year. And sometimes you just lose those people, sadly, because they just can't get their head around it. The walls have memory, right? So that's why I've told people, you've got to understand who is causing safety issues. You've got to get them out of there fast, or see if you can resolve it like now. That's why it's so critical, because it's, again, at the bottommost layer. And then also building an inclusive environment. Anybody who is not in the majority of your company is just not going to feel safe if there's nobody who's like them. It's just a natural human thing. So I'd like to reiterate, fix safety first, fix it fast. So at various companies I've helped advise, we identified a safety issue. That's the first thing you go after, and you fix it fast, and then you're going to spend about 6 months dealing with the rest of the ramifications of whatever safety issue there was, and you work hard on it. And if this is an issue you're dealing with, come talk to me. I've done a bit of it. Next one, respect. I'm sorry to use the word in the definition of it, but respect is a funny thing, and it's culturally dependent. It's basically, do people feel respected, and are they respecting others? This is a bit about boundaries, and sometimes boundaries are assumed. For instance, is a handshake okay? That's an interesting thing around respect. So what's important in a company is you define what respect means. And a lot of companies define that around, it differs by company. One I love to talk about because it's so fascinating is Amazon, extremely successful company. And they're very direct. One engineer told me what you do in Amazon is you go up to somebody and say, you screwed this up and here's how. That's normal. And that's the respectful communication. You kind of have to get used to it. At other companies, it's more warm and friendly. But it works for them. That's what's so fascinating about it. Respect is often eroded by assholes. And by the way, if someone shows me some kind of data that says hiring an asshole gives you 30% uplift in impact and ability, let me know, because I've not seen that data. There's a big trend happening right now. I kind of call it the no asshole revolution. Some companies, are you familiar with Slack? It's a very common chat program, especially in enterprise in Silicon Valley. And they have this really fascinating thing they call the no asshole rule. If you're an asshole twice, you're out. It's simple as that. And I think that's very interesting. I think it helps people understand what's okay. It's weird. Why are people jerks in the workplace? Leave it somewhere else. And miscommunication. This is extremely common, and this is one I work a lot on with companies. A lot of times, there's just miscommunication. I wish I could have shown it to you. I have a whole deck on communication because you have to teach engineers about communication. Because the weird thing is, we're not, at least in the US, we're not taught about how emotions work. In school, you're taught academics. We're never taught about our own brains. And so that's missing. It's something we're doing with our own kids to teach them how your brain works. So I have a whole deck on teaching engineers how their own brain works. Because the weird thing is, there's all these cues. I am currently sending a lot of cues to you with my body motion and all that, my face. Well, it all goes away when you're talking to them on the phone, and it really goes away when you're talking over email. So you can get a lot of miscommunication, and that's something I work on a lot. Clarify your values, the behaviors that are okay. This is very important. And enforce them. Hire carefully, fire fast. Hiring is a critical one, and this is why it's very important when you're hiring to have a diverse set of people hiring. Because I've definitely been in interviews where we had 4 males said yes, 1 female said no, and said the guy kept looking at me funny. I was like, that's not good. We would have missed that if it was all males. So it's very critical you hire carefully. Teaching about communication, this is what I'm talking about. People don't know how their own brains work, much less how communication works. If you want some help, if you would like to see this, I'd love to share it. I'm starting to share it now. I basically talk about the way our human brain works with network diagrams, because engineers love that stuff. Motivation. Here's a critical thing about motivation. You could have the most competent team, a respectful team, a trustworthy team, but if they don't give a crap, you can have a hard time. So this is really, are people excited to accomplish your mission? This is what I think the CEO's job is: get up every single week and get people pumped up again. No matter what was happening that week, on Friday over beer, they're excited again about Monday. One way to break down motivation even deeper was described by a guy, Daniel Pink, and he described it as 3 pieces: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Where autonomy is people like to they like to be their own people. And so they'd like to tread their own path. Mastery is all about they like to build the world's greatest, something exciting, right? And purpose, they like to have a sense of direction. What's fascinating, and I'll get into this here, is that oftentimes, and I experienced this at Reddit, people mistake autonomy as a reward. And that can be a reward. It has to be done in the right sense. But if you have too much autonomy, it's bad, because now everybody's going in a different direction. People recognize that, and then it's bedlam. So don't make that mistake. Unclear purpose is extremely common. Where are we going? What are the goals? What's the prioritization? What am I supposed to be working on? You can fix motivation by giving an appropriate amount of autonomy, and there's a really good model for this if you're in this situation. It's called situational leadership. I think we'll send out the slides, but I have a link to it, or you can Google for it, and it talks about a way to look at a team, look at a person and what they're doing, and suss out how much coaching you should be doing versus how much direction you should be doing. And this is critical because this will affect their motivation. If someone feels they're being managed, micromanagement, they don't like working. Add good goals and incentives, and understand what your incentives, what people like about incentives. I found that one group in one company I was advising loved parties, which blew my mind because I'm an engineer. I don't like parties. It's social, right? But they like parties. Engineers, I think, like. Some of them like to be seen, and have a lot of respect among their peers. So try to get them speaking at conferences, do things like that. There's a lot of different incentives. Some are just incentivized by a little bit more money because they, have a mortgage, and San Francisco prices. And then ensure that your goal formulation balances the top down and the bottom up. This is something that we did at Reddit, I think, pretty well when we came in. The executives need to get together, and they need to formulate where things are going for the next quarter. But then they should go to the engineers and say, we need to build a search engine. Come back to me with a plan. And now everybody has been part of the planning process, and they're invested, and it leads straight to their motivation because they have a piece of the autonomy pie, and probably you'll get a better answer. It's funny, as an executive, I started to realize how distant I was from the problem sometimes. Trust. I left this one a little bit for last because it is the hardest. I felt like it can be really hard to regain it once it's lost. And what trust is talking about is you'll know you have achieved trust when dependencies are not felt in the company. And what I mean by that is I should be able to build whatever team I'm on. I'm going to depend on a bunch of other teams. I need machines from operations. I need some new piece of service from infrastructure. I need these various other things. I need legal support from legal. But while I'm dependent on all of those groups, I don't want to feel the dependency. So it's all about have this graph of dependencies, making them not felt. In the same way, when I walk on this floor, I'm very much dependent on it, and I can trust that it will be solid, I hope. Oh, okay. It's solid. It's my walking sucks. But you have to be able to trust, and if you do that, the great thing is your entire organization, everybody will work together, and you will be able to make products way faster. You'll just see them come all the way up. And I'll show you how you kind of identify it. They're often eroded by a lack of healthy communication. You will see this oftentimes when people have an email going back and forth and it's getting heated. I actually tell people, if I see that email, you stop the conversation right there, you get coffee. Lack of healthy assumptions about others. This is also, I mentioned if you don't know why, you assume the worst. Engineers love to do this. What I tell engineers is focus on you. We've got plenty of problems. This is, I think, a line from someone at Netflix. I'm forgetting where. We've got plenty of problem finders. I need problem solvers. So I start to orient my engineers to come to me with 3 solutions. And then you will see that they will think far and deeper about what's going on, and they'll stop assuming that that group is a jerk. I've seen that so many times. They told me it was going to be here by Tuesday. It's not here. They must be jerks. No. So you got to actually teach people about what's actually going on. And so communication can help with that. Inconsistent delivery on promises. This leads to a lot of mistrust. So what we did inside Reddit that worked really, really well is to enforce when you set a date, that's maybe the most critical thing. And we will sometimes slip dates, but everybody, and it doesn't matter if you're working on Postgres, or if you're working on something in operations, or especially product where you've promised stuff by marketing, does not matter. We want to get everybody into this cadence of delivering on promises, and then the trust comes all the way from the bottom to the product. Sometimes eroded, and the reason I say sometimes is because I don't want people to assume these. Dishonest or subversive individuals. I've seen this once in my career. This is, don't assume, if you extend someone trust, don't assume that they're a psychopath. I've seen that once. It was very interesting, and I was like blown away because he was such a nice guy, seemed so smart, but it was all fake. His resume was all lies. It was really weird. But I've only seen this once, and that's why I say, do keep your ears open, but just assume that most of the people you hire won't have this, and I think you'll be happy. So how do we fix this? What I think is very important, especially for engineers and their teams, is they know who their customer is. And if they know who their customer is, their direct customer, then they reorient their job to making them happy. So you help them, you identify that customer. For instance, if you're on infrastructure, your job is not just to keep the site up, it's to make all the product people successful. Oh, wow. And then they start to actually orient, I think, to the direction that they're there for product. You're not just there for developers, which I believe was a mistake that was made in the 90s. Developer first. No, we're not making engineering for the sake of engineering. We're making products. Clarify team goals and ensure they're met on time. I believe the on time is so very critical, which is really weird. If I told myself that of 10 years ago, I would have hated myself. But it is so critical. And one of the things that's difficult here is a lot of engineers will not like this. But if you start to talk to them about the why, then they'll start to understand, oh, it makes everything faster. If everybody works together and they're all delivering on time, it means there's a culture of trust. Increased direct communication. I find this to be the most critical. I usually see 2 engineers fighting. They come to me and say, Marty, that guy's a jerk. Marty, that guy's a jerk. I don't think they're jerks. And I say, you guys got to grab coffee every single week, and then you see really good human bonding actually happen, because people don't like to call each other jerks to their face, and then they see there's another human on the other side. It's very critical. Yeah, go get coffee together. Go. It became almost like my knee-jerk reaction. And then increased communication of status. Everybody wants to know a little bit about what's happening, and this becomes critical that you find that right level. But I find that as you get every team to disseminate status, one of the side benefits is if someone comes to me and says, I don't know what that team's doing, I'm like, did you read their email they just sent out? Ooh. And then they actually become responsible for themselves to get up to date on status. It's also critical because some of your teams need to know status of all the rest of the teams. So if you're an operations team and that team is going to launch some product and that communication didn't happen, you should be reading all those emails and be like, wait a minute, something got missed here, a step got missed. And now you actually can stop problems before they happen. So I've kind of gone through a lot of these really fast, but I wanted to show you one more picture of all of these leading up. I use these for middle and safety tiers a little bit at Pinterest, and then I used them to pick apart Reddit. And the way I hope you can use them, I didn't go too much deep into them because I don't have time, but the way I hope you can use them is at least terminology and a strategy for how to take any organization, break it into these pieces, and then start to heal them, right? Anytime I have a big nebulous problem, I like to break it into smaller pieces. A couple of things I learned, and this is leading to the end here. If you don't drive your company's culture, it will drive itself, and oftentimes off a cliff. So you have to drive it. It has to be part of your job. I think CTO and VP of Eng, this is half of your job, culture, and the other half is making sure stuff comes out on time and great tech happens, right? But the second thing I learned that really was good to learn is fortunately the culture can be driven. I was a little nervous that this can be a really hard problem. This gets probably harder as the company gets bigger, but it can be driven. That's what's so critical, and I think it starts with you today. Just tonight, if it's a problem at your place, you can start to pick it apart. And if you need help, I'd love to help. So come talk to me afterward, or we'll grab email, we'll grab some coffee. And thank you. I'd like to open up to any questions.
Much. I see that people were talking about some problems with autonomous driving cars. I think autonomous driving cultures could also have some problems in that sense.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, I want to open up the question round here. And by the way, those slides that you mentioned, we might want to post some of those if it's okay, or we'll get them out to you guys. We'll tweet them or something along those lines. Is anybody working on reshaping their culture right now? Oh, perfect. Can we get the cube, the blue cube of truth out there? To you? Yep, for the question. Yep, just pass it down. Perfect.
Thank you for your speech. You said somewhere you have to guarantee safety as a pillar. But if you work in a big organization and you see that the market is changing and people don't want to open their eyes, you somehow have to tell them, see, the future is different. Otherwise, you would lie to them, and that's not, then you're an asshole.
Yeah.
So what's your answer to that?
Yes. How do you bring an org together if you've got to shift? The seeds are shifting. I think it goes back to transparency. Again, all the way back to that center of your brain that wants to know why and wants to fill in the reasons. And that's why I love vision. If you tell them where B is and you're looking out 5 years and you say, hey, look, the diesel engine's dead. The new thing's coming. And you're going to have a few people who are upset about that maybe. I actually don't know. Ask a few people about that market. But if you show them the data, you show them the reasoning, give them the framework, and then apply the framework. That's one of my favorite techniques, because then people know the why, and then you answer their question by using the framework you just taught them. So I think especially in a company, you really need to build a really compelling vision, and then you need to get, one of the most critical things is part of your manager's jobs to disseminate that information and make it critical. So one thing I teach all managers, especially the new ones, is you never, ever, ever go against your boss. I know that sounds weird and somewhat self-serving, but it makes a good culture of trust there too. Even if you disagree with them, and you can have those discussions in private, but if everybody believes in it and it ripples all the way up, then you can get that information all the way down to the engineers and disseminate that information at scale. But I'm a big believer in the framework, the why, and the vision.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Upstairs? Downstairs?
No.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, perfect. Well, I just want to... Oh, so here we go. Perfect. Touchdown.
So one more question. If you realize in a company that's really big and over different places spread, and you have a communication problem, how do you fix it? Do you use different tools or... weekly meetings, or what is your approach to fix that?
So at some point, so how do we fix communication, especially at a bigger company? As the company is growing, you have to build your segmentation right, and there's certain layers that need to communicate in different dimensions. And I think the most important thing is to layer all of that out, so you know all the pieces. but you need to be communicating upward, very critical, and that should be, at each stage, it should be getting simplified into the one message they really need to understand. And then downward, they need to understand what's coming from the other direction. Then between teams, this is where it gets exponentially complicated. You've got an n-squared graph of communication that can happen, and that, I swear that changes maybe weekly, depending on the number of engineers, because at each stage is a different thing. In the early days of Pinterest, I could turn around and be like, hey, this website's down, and someone, the other guy and I would fix it. When the company's 100 and then 500 and higher, you have to segment those groups a little bit deeper, find the paths. One thing I introduced into Reddit to solve a major communication issue is there wasn't a consistent task system for bugs, for planning. So we just made it consistent across everybody. And then we built out a whole system so all of that information can be, anybody can look at it, and we roll everything up to one central dashboard where you can see exactly the status of everything. So then people can go in and get the right level of information they need for their own thing. So if you're an operations person and you need to know what's coming out next week in terms of product, you can go in and look at your own slicing and view of what product is coming out. So I like to make the information generally available so that people can get the right level they need. I found email dissemination difficult because oftentimes people don't read the email. But I like to make it available. And then I like to make it very clear it is your job to be knowing what's going on. I don't like operations or infrastructure or product engineers to come to me and say, I didn't know this was coming out. Like, it's right there. So make it part of their job description to understand what's going on. More questions?
Perfect, yep. So we're slowly, communication's working, right? The questions are coming.
Yeah.
I work in a bigger company. I'm not in the management, but I do see that there's a big culture issue. So how can I coach my management and the layers above that they realize that they have to do something about it, and that they start doing something about it? So
how do you get the leadership to realize there's a culture problem?
Exactly.
I'll start from one premise. I think you have the right premise, which is I think the culture comes from them. And you see this, there's a couple companies that are having a lot of trouble in Silicon Valley because the CEO and or CTO and or others have a bad set of behaviors, and it goes all the way through. And at some point, something started to happen in these companies that just made it explode. And I don't know enough about what critical catalyst you need to recognize. I don't know if it has to go really bad before it's a problem, or if you can find that one executive who wants to listen. I think it at least starts with talking to your manager, and if they don't want to listen to you, I think it's always okay to go over their head and talk to their manager until you find somebody who wants to be your champion. At least that's the culture I believe in. I think you can always talk to your manager's manager, and go all the way up. So I'd recommend just starting and talking with them and identifying it very succinctly. What is the problem? And maybe it comes down to it's a trust problem. These teams are not working together, and here's what you get out of it if we solve it. And if they see the why and the what could become of it, they might get convinced. And then you'll know you've achieved it if they think it's their own idea. But I think it comes from first very concretely discussing what the actual issue is, so that they don't. There's a funny thing with managers and humans in general. They may get defensive if you tell them, hey, your organization got a bad culture, because that's their job. So you're going to have to, I think it's going to have to come down to making a safe spot for them to maybe hear the bad news. And then once they get past that bad news and then they start to believe in it, then I think the healing can begin. It's an interesting question. We should talk about it.
Sure.
Perfect, thank you. We have a question over here.
Launch it.
Ooh, nice catch.
Thank you. So in today's world, there are more and more people working in virtual teams, spread out all over the world, not meeting each other, not being able to have a coffee, like you said,
yes.
or just get on the plane and have a coffee and come back next week, maybe. How do you solve these culture issues with those teams?
So I can tell you what I've seen. I have not managed that size team because we didn't want to do that. A long time at Pinterest, we did not want to disseminate people, so we kept it really tight. And probably do so at Reddit also, because I think that's an easier path, and there's a lot of problems we deal with. You keep everybody in the building; they see each other. It makes the problem easier, right? What I've seen is the remote office thing works if you do it very carefully. Google, I think, if I recall correctly, at one point had a lot of offices all over India. And they realized that it wasn't working very well, so they reconsolidated into, like, I think one in Bangladesh or New Delhi or something. because all those little sites were not operating as efficient, and there were problems in a lot of them. What I found has worked in companies where we have done this and we send out is you take somebody from the company who understands how it all works, they understand the culture, and you stick them over there for a little while. You make them the manager, and now you've taken a little piece of the whole company over there, especially somebody who understands how all the communication works, so they can do the across-the-wire communication of status and all of that while managing that team. So what you're really doing is taking an expert in communication and how the company works and the culture, and you're going to stick them over there to seed the culture. We did that actually a little bit, I think at Pinterest, we made an office in Seattle, and it was seeded by some of the engineers who had been working at Pinterest for a while and were ready to step into management, and I think it went very well. I'm not totally certain, but that's one way. I love the idea. You take a person who's going to be the carrier over there and is going to be the communication point.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Time, we can chat after if anybody's interested.
Yeah, you'll be right after there in the back, and we got something for you here. Just we want to send you back with a carry-on size bag and a set of headphones.
Thank you. All right.
And,
thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, seriously, thank you very much for coming out here. I just want to say Victor's watching at home, by the way, so we should
Victor.
grab coffee when we get back to San Francisco. But thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause. Thank you. We'll bring it in after. Perfect. Thank you for making it down. Folks, we're about to go on break. We'll be back here in about half an hour, so at 11. So enjoy some coffee, get back into shape, and we'll see you guys in a bit. Thank you.